So welcome everyone. This is our training of trainers for our newest micro training that is around active play in hot weather, supporting outdoor play in ECE settings. So first off, we just want to give a shout out and a funding acknowledgement to our partners at CDC and ASPHN for their support of this work. And just an important note that the contents of the training are those of the authors and don't represent the official views of the government. So I want to first, before we dive in, give a very big shout out to members of our micro training advisory committee from across the country that helped provide feedback on this content as it was in development. So just a huge shout out to the folks here on the slide, and we really appreciate them and all of their feedback and expertise that they shared with us as we were developing this content. We always, with PALS, have our group agreements. We really hope that you all can engage with us, whether it's the chat, the reactions coming off of mute, and always, we want to hear from you, sharing your knowledge and expertise. And for some of you, this training of trainers might be a little bit different from train the trainer. So Rebecca is going to share a little bit more about this distinction.
It's good to see you guys, and we're lucky enough to see several of you guys yesterday in Albany, so it's so fun to see you again. As some of you may have joined our gardening micro-training last month, we're shifting our training of trainers from a train the trainer to a training of trainers to align with one of the states that we work with. Their professional development registry is adjusting their system to a TOT that will allow credentialed trainers to award PD hours for sessions that they've been trained on. It's very similar to a TOT. The way the state looks at it, it's a little bit more in depth. It has more content around how trainers facilitate the sessions, and then has more opportunities for either teach back or case scenarios. So the distinction is really more about the intent and scope and outcomes than a hard definition. So far on the micro training we did for gardening and the feedback surveys were great. People really enjoyed having a chance to go into small groups with peers and talk about the content and talk about the scenario. So we're excited to get your feedback today and see how you feel about it and what you think. It does give us a little more space so we're not as rushed to get through things. So that's kind of nice on our end too. Next slide. So I wanted to give you kind of a heads up. So as you're listening to the content today, you know what to expect at the end. You're not going to get blindsided, all right? So for our TOT activity today, it will be a case scenario discussion. So we're going to give you a hot weather situation and ask you to go into breakout groups and identify 3 safety measures from the content we've shared today that this program might want to consider to allow outdoor play to continue safely in the current weather climate. And we'll share more about that in this scenario. And then after you've completed the safety measures, we also want to go a little bit deeper and get you to think about 2 strategies that the staff might take as a follow-up action. So, what did they learn? How could they prevent this challenge in the future or reduce the likelihood? What are some things they might want to put in handbooks or policies? So that's going to be our closing activity. We will review it again as we go into breakout groups because we recognize there will be people that join the call. So appreciate your patience there. And we will be in breakout groups for 10 minutes with 4 people. So you'll have a good amount of time to get to know each other and talk. Back to you, Hannah.
Awesome. Thank you, Rebecca. So here we're going to we are sharing what the participant handout is going to be for the content. And one of the documents that we have is our participant handout, which you can see has some content that is covered in the training, a section for participants to jot down some notes. And then at the end of the training, we have a brainstorm opportunity. So some space there for participants to write down their ideas to brainstorm. So with that, we will jump right in. So this is our opening slide. We're really going to be building on the best practice of outdoor play that's covered in PALS. And we're going to talk about active outdoor play in hot weather, trying to understand the risks as well as think through some strategies for safe outdoor play during hot weather. Like all of our opening slides from PALS, there's always space to add your trainer information as well as your agency logo. The training is generally targeted at participants who have attended PALS in the past and understand the best practices around physical activity, because there's some content from PALS that will be reviewed, but you could also use it as an opportunity to bring people into ideas around physical activity to then get them to participate in PALS. Also, just wanted to note that the training, your participants might be a mix of administrators, classroom teachers, home providers, and some programs might not be able to adapt their schedule, change their schedules to adapt to hot weather. So we want to encourage them to think creatively about how they can apply this content to their own settings and really focus on what they do have control over. Again, we want this content to introduce ideas and concepts that they could bring back to their program and influence the practices and environments. So our 4 objectives for the training are listed here, and they're going to, as I said, explore strategies that support children and ECE providers in safely enjoying active play in hot weather. This slide is just really tying the training to the content to the broader goal that children will have daily, year-round outdoor play, and for caregivers to know how to support it safely, even in our hot weather. So we open the training with a short game of fact or fiction to check participants' knowledge about hot weather play. There's multiple ways that you could engage with this activity. If you're doing it virtually, you can have folks use the chat box to write fact or fiction. Maybe use reactions like a thumbs up for fact and a thumbs down for fiction. You can even assign movements to fact or fiction. So if the response is fact, they could do arm circles, and fiction, raise the roofs. So those are some options. For today, if we could just use the chat as we go through, I think that'd be great. So our first fact or fiction is that children should avoid outdoor play entirely during hot weather. What do we think? Fact or fiction? Yes, I see fiction rolling in. Thank you all for engaging. We know that outdoor play is vital. And even in hot weather, we're going to talk about how to manage it safely. Yes, I see Deanna already thinking about some of the strategies we can take around hot weather play. All right, number 2. Well, that's fiction. Number 2, thirst is the only sign a child needs to drink water. What do we think? Fact or fiction? Yeah, you all are very good. Fiction. So children need those regular reminders and frequent water breaks because they're not aware of their hydration status. So we're going to talk about that a little bit more, but you all are on top of it. Finally, fact or fiction. The hottest part of the day is usually between 10 a.m. and 3 p.m. What do we think? Fact or fiction? Yes, facts rolling in. That is correct. It's around 10 to 3. And so knowing this can help us plan for safe outdoor play and think about how we want, if it's possible, to adjust our schedules with this in mind. All righty. So as we know, outdoor play was part of the PALS learning session content and was included in multiple of the recommended practices. So this slide recaps the best practices that are related to outdoor play from PALS. As you can see, it's addressed in 5 of the different best practice areas. You might have had participants that have done the full PALS training recently, so you wouldn't need to spend as much time on this slide, but you might have a group that's newer to PALS that would benefit from the recap. So the notes here on this slide are going to dive into the content a little bit deeper and how each of these best practices are connected to outdoor play. We also have a recap where we share the recommended practices that are coming from caring for our children, for both infants and for our toddlers and preschoolers around outdoor play, that they should be getting 2 to 3 periods of outdoor play daily, weather permitting for all children, and remembering that there's that time time requirement for toddlers and preschoolers to have 60 to 90 minutes, but there's not an established time recommendation for infants. It's important to note that time outdoors may be shortened due to hot conditions, but the goal is still that children should go outside 2 to 3 times, except if it's extreme or really dangerous weather. Also to note that for toddlers and preschoolers, the recommended is around a minimum of 2 adult-led activities. And we'll talk about, and 2 adult-led structured activities, and how doing structured activities, especially outdoor during hot weather, an ECE provider can better regulate the intensity of the activity, which is really important when we're thinking about being active during hot weather. There is a discussion prompt that's built in here on this slide, asking participants to reflect on their own practices and how they align with the recommendations. And it's really about giving participants starting to think about their own practices before we dive further into the content around outdoor play. So after sharing the best practices, we recap some of the benefits of outdoor play for both adults and children. We know that the benefits are wide-ranging, from immunity, better mental health, improved vision, and for children specifically, being able to be outdoors increases the amount of active play because they have greater opportunity to practice and develop those gross motor skills. And that children who spend time outdoors, actually, there's research that shows that they're more engaged in the environment and conservation. If you want in the chat, you can share what benefit stands out the most for you when it comes to some of the benefits of outdoor play. I can know for me personally that improved sleep is one that's really, really stands out for me. All right, so with that, we dive into our first objective, where we're going to discuss the impact of heat on a young child's body during physical activity. It's important that we understand the impact so that we can plan and prepare for safe outdoor physical activity during hot weather. So on this slide, we are using the metaphor of cooking a potato to understand how heat impacts children. If you think about cooking a potato, if you have a big potato, the heat will have a tougher time getting into its core and it'll take longer to cook. But smaller potatoes will cook much faster because the heat can reach their centers more quickly. So young children are like that small potato in which the heat can get faster to the core. Children also have a larger body surface area compared to their weight. So on a hot day, they're absorbing heat faster because more of their body is exposed relative to their size. So these reasons are why children's health might be more at risk during hot weather, hot temperatures. Children also can get dehydrated more easily. One, because a larger percentage of their body weight is water. And as we talked about a little bit in our fact and fiction, they're not good at knowing when they are thirsty or getting dehydrated. They may fail to notice or be able to communicate that they're becoming dehydrated. So by the time that they might ask for water, they already might be quite dehydrated. So the children really depend on the adults to remind them, both to remind them to hydrate and also to provide opportunities to do so. Just to note, if this potato metaphor doesn't work for you, you can obviously feel free to adjust it or remove it. Really, but the important point that we're trying to get across here is that because of children's size and other factors about their bodies physically, they can become sick more quickly in heat and therefore need to be monitored more closely during hot weather. So here we're sharing the signs and symptoms of heat-related illness. The staff play a really critical role in monitoring children for these different signs and symptoms, and if they notice them, to provide break, shade, and or fluids. The younger children are, the more carefully they should be monitored. Also, something important to note is that heat could impact a child's behavior. So, like a crankiness or maybe not acting like themselves, a reason might be because of overheating. So that's another sign to note to keep an eye on. So we just talked about how heat can have negative impacts on children. And so we want to know how to understand the risk of heat and extreme heat in our community. So this is a resource from the CDC that's free and online, and it's called Heat Risk, and it can help understand the local heat risk in the community. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to stop sharing my screen here, and I'm going to share the heat risk window, and we're going to walk through it together and see how we could use this to understand the heat risk in our community. Let's zoom in a little bit. So this is the homepage. As you can see, it has a map of the entire United States, and it's color coded for the heat risk, as you can see. So right now, good part of the Midwest where I'm at is pretty cool, but as you can see, the South and the West have some heat risk. So what I'm going to do is I am going to put in a zip code for our Nemours Children's Health, Florida, where our hospital is located in Duval County. So you can put in your own zip code here. And as you can see, once you put in your zip code, it gives you a heat risk specifically for your location. So you can see that today in Duval County, the heat risk is moderate. It gives you some more information. It's an okay day for people to be out, for most people, but people who are outside for a long time and who are sensitive to heat, like young children, could have health impacts. As we scroll down, it talks about some different actions to protect your health, which we'll cover several of these later: being in shade, taking breaks, doing activities during cooler parts of the day. And another thing that I like about this is it gives us a heat risk for the rest of the week. So you can see specifically for Duval County, we're at Wednesday today, moderate, but on Thursday and Friday of this week, that heat risk could be major. So that can help us when we're thinking about plans for the rest of the week. If we know it's going to be a major or extreme heat weather day, what are things that we can do in a program and think about to make sure that we're prepared for that? And let's see, as we keep scrolling, it gives us that map again. And then as we go all the way to the bottom, we're going to talk about this a little bit more, but I wanted to note that it shares information on air quality. So heat and air quality are related because heat can make air quality worse. So it's nice that we have both our heat risk and our air quality risk all in one place here on this website. So as you can see for our Duval County, the air quality index, or AQI, is in a moderate range right now. So another thing to consider, we'll talk about it a little bit more, but another thing to consider when we're making decisions about whether it's safe to be outside and how long we could be outside for. So when you are facilitating this, if you want, you could do the website like I have shared with you today and walk through. You could use the QR code. You could change the screenshots out. But I'd love if anybody has any ideas of how they think they might want to facilitate this content, you can feel free to drop it in the chat if you are interested in sharing. I think that having visuals can be really helpful for providers. And I think that the color coding in both the heat risk and the air quality index can be really helpful when making those decisions. So here we have a slide where we talk about state licensing related to hot weather and outdoor play. On the slide, we have an example from Tennessee because they have the strongest licensure that supports physical activity of all states. You could update the slide with any state-specific information related to licensing and hot weather for your state to make sure that it's relevant for your participants. But if your state doesn't have licensing that includes info related to hot weather, you can keep this Tennessee example up and you could talk through some different parts of this licensure and some of the things that it specifically calls out. Like it calls out, you can see in A, it calls out a heat threshold. It says to go daily opportunity between 32 and 95 degrees. It talks about having written policies. So there are some things specifically in that in this licensing that you can share and talk through if you don't replace it with your own state. So in addition to the risks of temperature, hot weather can bring additional environmental risks to the equipment and the materials that are on play spaces. So here we talk a little bit more about the impact of heat on surface temperatures. This is research from UCLA, and their research shows how different surface temperatures can vary based on the material, with the rubber surfaces getting the hottest. So in this graphic, this would be on a 92-degree day. The surface temperature of grass could be about 95. Asphalt getting up to 150, and poured rubber surfaces could be the hottest at 165. So you can see that the type of surfaces that a program might have could really impact heat. Another thing to note is that play areas in shade can reduce heat, can reduce the temperatures even more across all of these surfaces. And shade can be a really important strategy for reducing the impact of heat. And we'll talk a little bit more about shade. Also to note that checking equipment and checking play equipment that's been outside in the heat to ensure that it's safe for use, and an opportunity to think through what portable play equipment programs might have, especially that could be brought from inside or from a shaded area to play in so that it could be not as impacted by the heat. So as we had looked at a little bit on the heat index, another environmental risk factor to be aware of is our air quality. It seems like air quality has become something that's really been more broadly talked about in the past few years. I know that I personally didn't really understand air quality until some of the Canadian wildfires led to where I was living having red and purple days. And so I really started understanding how big of an impact it could have. So we want to spend some time describing what air quality is and why it's important and related to heat. So as I said, air quality can be negatively impacted by heat. High temperatures can lead to more harmful pollutants in the air. And our young children breathe faster and breathe more air compared to their body weight than adults. So if the air quality is at an unsafe level, the children can be especially impacted. Another thing to note is that children with or adults with asthma might be more sensitive to air pollution or higher AQI. So something for programs to consider if they have children in their program with asthma. Again, the AQI kind of mentioned it's color coded is how it's communicated. And so the lower numbers, the green, are better and safer air quality. And you saw that there was some information on the heat risk page, lots of weather apps, even just like the Apple weather app now has a space where it talks about air quality to be able to check it, or some other government like airnow.gov website includes that information too. So we talked about a lot of different factors that could influence the decision whether or not to play outside during hot weather. So this slide, and that the answer might be different for every program. So the slide is about considering all of those different factors to make an informed decision about whether outdoor play is safe. So some things to consider: the licensing requirement. In your state, in the programs, is there a temperature threshold, like the example that we saw from Tennessee? Is there other information from licensing that can help them to make that determination? Thinking about what is the heat index or that feels like temperature. I know sometimes you look and it says, oh, it's 80 degrees, but it feels like 87. So taking that into consideration, because that brings in humidity, which can make it harder for our bodies to sweat and to release heat. What is that air quality index? Remember, higher air quality rates can be unhealthy, especially for sensitive groups, really young children or kids with asthma. Access to shade, thinking about a program, how much shade do they have? What are the surfaces that their play area is made of? As much as possible on hot days, trying to do outdoor play in shady or grassy areas because it's not as hot as the other surfaces. Also, how old are the children in the program? So infants and toddlers, if a program is only infants and toddlers, it might be a different decision that they make if it's all preschoolers, because the smaller kids are, the more that their bodies can heat up. So in all cases, monitoring children during outdoor play is super important. There are going to be some times when weather is either too hot or the outdoor space is not well suited for outdoor hot weather play. In these cases, it might not be appropriate for young children, especially infants and toddlers, to play outside, but we want providers to be able to have this information to try to really make a decision that's right for them and for their space. And again, there might be providers in the same city or the same town with the exact same heat index, but their answer about whether it's safe to go outside to play might be different because of access to shade, age of children, surfaces. So again, we want to equip providers with the information to make the best decision for their programs during hot weather. You can also have a conversation with participants here about what other things they might take into consideration when they're making these decisions. Maybe their program has specific policies. Maybe it's not in licensure, but their program has a policy around hot weather. So thinking about that, maybe what equipment they have access to. Do they have only equipment that is outdoors all the time? Do they have access to some portable play equipment? And also questions about staffing is important. So with that, we are going to jump into our second objective. So after we discussed how heat negatively impacts kids, we want to focus on strategies to reduce the impact of heat during outdoor play. And we are going to focus on the 4 strategies that are listed here so that children can enjoy outdoor play while they're safe and hydrated and comfortable. So our first strategy to think about is adapting schedules and routines. So, in our fact or fiction, you all correctly responded that the hottest part of the day is from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. So knowing that, what are some ways here on the slide, talk through some options for adapting schedules and routines, having that in mind. So maybe planning for outdoor play either earlier or later in the day when the sun isn't as strong. Avoiding that hottest part of the day, that 10 to 3. Can plan for shorter periods of outdoor play. Maybe normally on a schedule, they go outside for 45 minutes. But if it's a really hot day, maybe they can break it up into 3 15-minute opportunities throughout the day. Also making sure that there's many breaks built in for water and for shade. Another opportunity is to plan for less intense or less energetic activities. This is back to that structured adult-led activities where adults can better monitor the exertion of children. And we'll share what some of those specific activities could look like. Later in the training, there'll be an opportunity to actually look at a schedule and look specifically at how that schedule could be adapted. But there is a discussion prompt that we built in here to get providers start thinking about their own schedules and then how it could be modified for safe outdoor play during hot weather. So the second strategy is sun protection. And there's many ways that we can help protect children from the sun, including shade, sunscreen when appropriate, and sun protective clothing and accessories. So shade, you can escape the direct heat from the sun, but it's also a cooler space for children's bodies to better regulate temperature. And there's a lot of different ways that shade can be provided, whether it's trees and shrubs, structures like the canopies in this photo. Also have participants maybe consider temporary shade options, like maybe putting a sheet or on a fence or tent poles or using a parachute. Maybe they have a parachute that they use for play. And if it's possible to somehow hang that and create some shaded areas, or maybe even pop up shade structures. There's a resource in the notes of this slide that is from the Natural Learning Initiative that has some creative ideas around shade that can also be shared with participants. When it comes to sunscreen, having a conversation with participants about sunscreen safety and being sure to include information that's relevant to your state's regulations because we know it varies. Sun protective clothing is super important and is that lightweight, loose-fitting clothing. Also hats and sunglasses, which can help protect skin. We'll talk about it more when we get to the family engagement strategy, but it's important to communicate with parents about the best attire to send their children with, if possible, when the weather is going to be hot, so that children are prepared and ready to be active outside. So our next strategy is around water. We've talked about that children are less aware of their hydration status and they rely on the adults to both provide the water and the opportunities to drink. The young children might not be able to recognize their need for fluids, so it's important to provide frequent opportunities. And they should be really built into outdoor play, especially when it's hot. Depending on the temperature and how active children are, they should be scheduled at least every 15 minutes, if not more often. They could be added to the daily visual schedule so children know what to expect. Whether that's bringing coolers with cups outside or reusable water bottles. Also a great opportunity to do water breaks in the shade. So it's that you get the cooling effect from the shade and also from drinking water. Noting here that for our children under 6 months, they should only be drinking breast milk or formula to keep them hydrated. Another opportunity with water could be creating cool down stations if they maybe have some extra things to support that, like misters, fans, spray bottles, even cool towels. Some misters, could be expensive, but you could also even use like a cheap spray bottle from a dollar store that could provide some cooling. You could even incorporate it into the activities. Maybe children are moving through a pathway, and at the end, they could like request a spray at the end as they move through the pattern to cool off a little bit. And again, like a hydration spot in the shade is the best opportunity to be able to cool down. So here we have a discussion prompt around family engagement. We want to know, and policies, we want to know what policies programs currently have in place, if any, around hot weather and how they communicate them with families. There's also a follow-up question in the notes too, asking participants that have policies and that communicate with them with families of how that's impacted the children's readiness to play outdoors during hot weather. So maybe it's that having a policy in place and communicating it with families means that children are showing up with the appropriate sun protective clothing to be able to be ready to go outside and play during hot weather. And again, this is really an opportunity to discuss the importance of policies and communication so that children show up ready to be physically active during all weather. We did include here an example of a hot weather policy statement and an opportunity for a further group discussion on policies. You could have a volunteer read the slide aloud or give participants time to read the policy statement. If you have an example from a program that you work with, you could swap that out here too. And another prompt that's built in here around policies that your program has that supports outdoor weather in outdoor play in hot weather. And if you feel like this was addressed during the last prompt, you can ask, how could your policies be changed or adapted to support you even further? This could be something that could be especially relevant if the participants in the program don't have the power to make policies at their programs themselves. So they could encourage them to think about what statements, if they were included in their policies, could support them as they lead outdoor play during hot weather. I just saw in the chat too, when approaching the summer, we sent parents a memo with all important information, how to stay safe. Stay safe. Wow, I can't talk. During the hot weather. That's a great example of a family engagement strategy. All right, so we have a brain boost built in here that is our tracing fingers activity. And I think maybe we can all do it together to take a little moment to reset. So this is our brain boost. So if you'll do it with me, if you put your hand out like a stop sign and you take your other index finger and you start at the base of your thumb, and you're going to breathe in as you move up and out. In and out. In and out. In and out. In and out. Great. That was a nice little reset. And we've included this activity specifically because it demonstrates how simple movements and breathing can calm heart rates and help relax. So this is an activity that can be done outdoors on a hot day when educators and providers are noticing that the children are breathing heavily and might need a rest, a reset, or a break. It could also be done as a transition activity before moving back indoors. You can feel free if you have other breathing activities or exercises that you like or that resonate with providers to include that there. So that brings us to our third objective, which is to discuss two types of activities that providers can do with young children during hot weather. So we talked about adapting routines, right? And how that's a key strategy for reducing the risk of heat. And one way to do so is to plan for both slower and shorter activities when children are outside. So listed on the slide are activities that are in the category more of light physical activity rather than moderate to vigorous physical activity. When we know we want children engaging in moderate to vigorous physical activity, when the weather is really hot, we also want to make sure that they're not overexerting themselves. So the slide has examples of practicing gross motor skills, which can be a great opportunity like catching or kicking. So, it's a lighter, slower activity, but also we're really promoting the fundamental movement skill practice. It could also be an opportunity to practice different types of movements that might be less heat producing. So rather than running or skipping, providers could encourage sliding or tiptoeing. And again, being physically active outdoors can help children meet important developmental milestones for their movement and for their physical development. In the notes, we include a bit more information on each of these kind of categories of games. You can ask participants to share their favorite activities that they do in each of these categories, and also how they could be adjusted to be slower or shorter versions of those games. Another thing to note is that many of these activities include staff as active participants in play. We know that young children are more engaged when the adults engage with them in physical activities, whether that's doing the activities with them or just really showing enthusiasm and encouragement. When talking about staff as active participants in play during hot weather, you might get some pushback or concerns about adults not wanting to get hot and sweaty. So, one conversation that you could have is the importance of the adults also following the same safety considerations and strategies that we talked about, right? They need to be taking breaks, drinking water, finding shade, also wearing appropriate clothing if they're going to be outside engaging with the children. Another thing that might resonate with providers is explicitly highlighting the connections between active outdoor play and behavior regulation and physical activity as a tool to support challenging behaviors. There's research that shows that time spent playing outside directly can benefit children to improve their impulse control, their self-regulation, and their behavior generally. I'd be really open to see if anybody in the chat has any other ideas for how to address pushback from providers about not wanting to get hot and sweaty themselves, because we know that this can be a reality and a conversation that it might be good to be prepared to have with some ideas of how to address any pushback. So I welcome you to share in the chat any ideas that you might have. So another great option for physical activity during hot weather is water play. Engaging with water can help them stay cool. Sprinklers, hoses, individual water basins are also safer than larger wading pools. So we share some ideas here on the slide for water play. There's whole body water play. And this can also encourage some of that moderate to vigorous physical activity. It's easier to get your heart rate up and run if you're running through a sprinkler, right? Because that water from the sprinkler can help keep your body cool. And then there's also options that we share for water play that are focused on more fine motor movements and include low-cost equipment, toy wash, sponge games, ice age bin. We had a trainer share with us an idea of using for littler ones, for infants or toddlers, using a cookie sheet as like a water table, because there's not as much water on it, but that they can still play with the water. So I really liked that opportunity. And when we're talking about water play, we always have to talk about water safety and how important that is, and that there's constant adult adult active supervision when children are engaging with water. Another thing when we think about water play is another conversation around appropriate attire, whether children have a change of clothes or shoes, towels, and scheduling time. More time might be needed to build into the schedule to change and have kids ready to play outside. Um, and yeah, just another opportunity for programs to share what other water activities they do. We always encourage participants to share because they're on the ground doing this every single day. And I'm sure that they have amazing ideas that children love to engage with in water play in their programs. And there's more in the notes, and there's actually a link. There's a link to a resource about building your own water table too in the notes when thinking about low cost options. So for the final objective, participants are going to explore ways to adjust ECE schedules for safe outdoor play during hot weather. So here on the slide, we have a daily schedule for a typical ECE program, and there's many different ways to facilitate this activity. You could lead a large group discussion or breakout groups of how to adjust the schedule that's here on the slide for a hot weather day. We've included a few responses or ideas in the notes, but really want to hear from participants about what ideas they have. So for example, they could move the outside play that's happening currently on the schedule from 10:15 to 11:30, try to move it maybe before the morning snack to be able to get outdoors before 10 a.m., which we know it's when the hottest part of the day starts. Another idea could be that outdoor play time currently is a 45-minute block. And instead of that longer session, maybe they could break the outdoor play into shorter periods of 15 to 20 minutes, multiple times a day. Also wanted to note that this content is built as a 60-minute session, but this is an opportunity here where it could be expanded to a 90-minute session by expanding this final objective here. You could either virtually or in person provide small groups or breakout groups with copies of this schedule and have groups look at it together and come up with ideas and then share back on how they would adjust it. And you could also encourage participants to potentially to bring a copy of their own schedule to the training to be able to review it and to think through what changes could be made for a hot weather day. Another thing that we talk about in the notes here are other adjustments that would need to be made to a schedule, including water availability. If you choose to maybe move outdoor playtime to during arrivals, making sure that maybe you don't normally have water available at arrival time, but if we're going to have outdoor play then, so something to consider, communicating with families and using whatever shade that they have. As I noted, you might have some participants that can't change their schedules, so you could consider adjusting the content of this section. Instead of looking at a daily schedule, you could have them think about how they could integrate one of the other strategies into their programs, like what are other sun protection opportunities they could have, how could they think about what policies they might be able to, how could they adjust their policies, or what they could do around family engagement. So there's some more in the notes there if you have programs, if you're working with programs that can't change their schedule. This is our summary activity at the end of the content, and it's meant to be an energizing way to close out the training for participants to reflect on what they learned and really identify just one small step they could do in their program to support active play in hot weather. Depending on the size of the group, you could pair them or put providers in small groups, especially if you have folks from the same program, you could have them do it together or separate. And there's some ideas in the notes. And again, as I shared at the beginning, we have our participant handout. There's space on the participant handout to be able to jot down some ideas there around one action that they could take to prepare for safe outdoor play during hot weather. And also just wanted to share, there's a few ideas of examples in the notes there. One could be a newsletter template to share information about hot weather play with families. Another idea is prepare a hot weather kit. So have something that's ready to go with equipment and game ideas for the next hot weather day. Thinking back to that heat risk that we looked at, we saw that when we were looking in Duval County, we knew that Thursday and Friday were going to be hot weather days, that the risk was high. So maybe having a plan for that that includes a list of activities and potential equipment to use could be an action step that a program could take there. And then we have our key takeaway slide to close out, reminding participants that the importance of all children having 2 to 3 times of outdoor play a day when the conditions are safe, that we understand that heat impacts young children differently, so that it requires planning ahead. And that finally, some of the considerations to keep outdoor play safe in hot weather, understanding the environment, adapting our schedules, and really engaging with families. Right? I'm going to turn it back to Rebecca.
All right, now is our time to go to breakout rooms. So we have a brief scenario for you that we're going to ask you to take a look at on the screen. I am going to put it in the chat so that when you go to your breakout rooms, you'll still have access to the chat and you can, whoops, I didn't do it. You'll be able to read it if there's any questions or anything you want to clarify about the scenario. And then you can see there are some instructions to the right. We'd like for you guys to get in your groups and introduce yourself first, because we do have a variety of states on the call. So the odds are you're not going to know who, but it'll be an opportunity to make some new friends. We're going to ask you to identify some safety measures, and then also to identify 2 strategies that staff might want to do as a follow-up to prevent future concerns, future issues, make it simpler for staff to think about how to handle the situation on hot days. All right, so we're going to go to breakout rooms for 10 minutes, and I've tried to do groups of 3 or 4, and we will see you back in just a few minutes. Welcome back, everyone. I hope your group discussions were good. My group was really nice and fun to connect and talk to people in a small group for a few minutes. Is anybody willing to share any of the strategies that you shared in your group? Maybe strategies that we didn't talk about? And
I don't mind saying all of us were originally from New York, so we got a New York group. One of the ladies said, which I thought this was a really good idea, 9:45 is a little late to be thinking about going
mm-hmm.
outdoors. Having someone that's kind of the weather person, looking at the weather the night before, and going ahead and having 2 schedules. You have your regular schedule, but if you live in an area where you're going to have a lot of hot days, go ahead and have a hot weather day schedule.
Mm-hmm.
So if you know this is what's going to happen that day, you've already got your schedule in place.
I
And I
love
thought that was a
that.
really good idea.
I love that one. I'm putting them in the chat, so
Mhm.
please add yours if you have stuff and you don't want to come off mute,
I
but
just thought that was, yeah, 9:45 is too late to be thinking about what's going to happen.
agree.
So in our group, we just talked about really great strategies. So first of all, like as a program leader, when the summer months are coming up, you want to review the program's policies and procedures in regards to hot weather. It also could be an opportunity to talk with staff about adjusting their schedules so that the children can get out as much as possible on those days ahead of time. We also shared like having someone designated as that monitor. So maybe they again can use that website. They can go out in the playground and assess to make sure everything is safe for the children. And then also too, we talked about communicating with parents. So we would in my program, we used to tell the parents like this is our summer schedule, these are the activities that we do outdoors. Could you bring your child in dressed? Could you put on the sunscreen ahead of time? That way it kind of took that pressure off the teacher and they can go outside more easily every day. So again, too, if like everybody's involved and there's communication involved, it just makes things easier. And again, if you're going over those policies ahead of time, you're not going to get that that pushback. It's like, this is what we do here at our program. And again, too, we're still supporting, children's growth and development, and they need to go outside every day when it's
Thanks,
safe.
Mom. When it's safe, yeah. Thanks, Mom. Morgan says in the chat, indoor physical activity cards for when you just can't get outside. I think that's always a great idea because, even when you can get outside early, some kids need more physical activity. So just being ready to respond to the needs of the kids when they need that, and you have to do it inside. Casey added about squirt bottles, freeze toys in Tupperware. I used to freeze toys in Tupperware to make giant ice cubes to put in the water table. Yeah, definitely love that. It really keeps it down. It reminds me of digging for dinosaurs. You know how you bury the dinosaurs in the sandbox? These are great.
We shared a few ideas too. I have a program that uses sponges, like water balloons. So just filling a bucket, putting a whole bunch of sponges in there, cutting them. You could even cut them up. They're going to be less impact if they hit, child hits another child with it, and it's not going to have the issue of the choking hazard of the balloon, of a typical water balloon. And it's something that doesn't need a ton of preparation, just having those supplies ready in a bucket and filling the bucket with water. And we also agreed looking at 9:45 is not always the most prepared. I did mention too, like a lot of programs do special activities already in the summer, like they might have a spirit week. So thinking of ways that you can incorporate those hot weather expectations in, like having a hat day, so that everyone's going to have a hat to go for a walk or to be outside, not having pajama day on the day that's expected to be 95 degrees, maybe doing a Hawaiian day or a swimsuit day instead, something like that, so that you have those things prepared.
Thanks, Rachel.
We also talked about that when you guys talked about the different types of activities, that's a great time for children to work on their balance. And the lady from our group was talking about the tricycles. If she would come back on and talk about that assessment, I thought that was really neat.
Who was talking about the tricycles?
Yeah, the tricycles.
We did talk about tricycles in my group while we're waiting for somebody to figure
Yeah.
out that. We
She,
talked
she,
about doing a bike wash,
Mhm.
and
and
again, water play for that. Go
she
ahead.
talked about the fact that like when they assessed 97% of the children did not know how to use a tricycle. So
Mm,
that's the perfect time to be working on that. And then, as you said, when they're done, maybe have a tricycle wash at the end.
thanks, Carol. Tabitha's got something in here about wearing swim shoes and providing water pads so they can step into the pool. These are great.
Yeah, I was going to share what Chris in our group put in the chat is having visuals. She shared that right out by the playground doors, they had a visual that would say if it was going to be a hot weather day and what are some of the activities that they could do. And there was a visual board for both the staff and the children to be able to see and notice that. And I think that was a great idea too.
Mhm. All right. Any other comments or feedback from your groups you want to share? I know there was probably some great discussion everybody could benefit from. There's a lot of smart people on this call.
Well, the group that I was in, we discussed mainly the issues that have with the heat, with the materials that hold the heat, such as the rubber mulch or, items like that, the uh, outside grass that you buy and put down was it gets really hot. That the more natural materials are the ones that stay a little cooler for
Mhm.
that. And we just talked about those things that you would have for shade and the tents for shade on that.
Thanks, Valerie. I think that piece of this content's really interesting, and a lot of people don't realize how much hotter the rubber mulch and the poured surfaces are than natural substances. I think even just raising awareness of that and giving space for discussions around it is a great thing that we can do with our participants, our providers.
Well, that was Laura who did that.
Thanks, Laura.
Just to put on to that, we also talked about utilizing your shaded areas as well, thinking about where those are and how you can incorporate those physical activity or your extra activities you bring with you outside to your playground, incorporating those into your shaded areas to entice them to play in the shade as well.
Yes, definitely. Thank you. There's something else in the chat around making sure the adults are enjoying the children and they're not sitting in the shade. And I'm so thankful you raised this because that's one way adults are attuned to what the children are experiencing and they're not getting overheated, is they're in the same situation, in the same setting as the kids. So love that. Thank you.
I used to have a hot weather bin, and it just contained toys and items that didn't come out all the time, so that when they came out, they felt special and the children really enjoyed it. But I would have a picnic blanket in there with some different storybooks, and I would put it in the shady corner of the playground, and they could sit on that and read a book. I also had a big tote with some mega blocks in it, and the blocks only came out, again on those really hot days, or the ice cubes I mentioned. But yeah, lots of great things. And I think having those squirt bottles and things ready inside, whether you have a hot weather tote inside and one outside with different materials, but having things that are easy and ready to grab so that you don't have to pivot last minute. Our group had agreed that even though it was 9:45 and outside time was at 10, we were still going to let them go out, especially since the kids were excited about it. And we were just going to shorten the length of time, utilize shade, and do what we could to kind of keep everybody comfortable.
Thanks, Casey. Don't underestimate like a 5-minute break in the middle of playtime where everybody comes into a cool area, whether it be the shade or back inside to the air conditioning for 5 minutes to bring our body temp back down and then go back out. Things don't always have to be complicated strategies. It's the simple things sometimes we overlook. So just raising them and discussing them can be really powerful.
Yes, teachers need water too. So you're modeling hydrating when you do that water break.
Yes, they do. All right. Well, thank you guys for your participation in the breakout rooms. And I hope you enjoyed your group as much as I enjoyed mine. Hannah, back to you.
Great. Yeah, I think that we just have some, we talked about a lot of these, but we just shared some ideas for safety measures. I think you all probably covered all of these things, outdoor water station, lightweight clothing, shortening outdoor play. So again, just some safety measures that can be taken. And then also, this was mentioned by many of you about what are some of the things that the staff can do and make decisions. So discussing whether outdoor play can move earlier in the mornings, changing schedules, creating some type of chart or index to guide decisions. I really like what somebody said about identifying like a weather person or one person that's going to make that decision and be responsible also for assessing the playground. We talked a lot about alternate schedules. Having one on the go and ready. So when that day comes, there's, more and more hot days are happening over the summers. So maybe in the springtime, or they have time to be able to do that and create those schedules. Communicating it with families, reminders about clothing and hydration. We talked a little bit too about staff clothing and hydration and having those conversations. The same things apply, the same safety considerations apply. And then as I believe Simone brought up, taking the time to review policies and family handbooks and revise them as needed. So just want to take a minute and see if anybody has any questions about the content, any comments. Would love to open the floor if there's anything you all want to share about the microtraining content today.
I like the fact that you mentioned that the higher heat index increases or decreases the quality of air, but it affects the air quality, which affects the smaller children, which their body size can't take a lot of it with the heat, but it also, they're smaller there, and it affects people that have asthma. So in that aspect, it's something we don't always think of when we're out there. We're mainly just thinking of being hot and thirsty. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Valerie. Well, as we are closing out, I want to share the feedback survey for you all. I believe Rebecca just put it in the chat. We really appreciate you all being here and your engagement with this content, and we hope that it's valuable to the providers in your areas and can help create some ideas and some to make sure that children are outside safely during the hot weather that we know is happening and is coming in the future. We're also dropping in the chat the link to the Basecamp for the materials. Again, that it has the PowerPoint, our facilitator guide, and the participant handout. Those will be posted on our website with the recording in the near future, but in the meantime, you can pull them down from the Basecamp file.